Welcome to Access Lunchtime. Today's meeting is going to be presented by Kim Young. I have known Kim for years and years. She is a fantastic Access developer. I know that she's spoken at several Chicago area user group meetings, presenting various different topics over the years, and has been a visitor at Access Lunchtime as far as a presenter at least once. I don't think more than one time. This is your second time. She has had a lot of experience with Access databases and hopefully has some great things. Although I don't know how much Kim taught me about Access specifically, she has taught me a lot about designing systems and great programming practices. So I really respect her in that. All right, go ahead, Kim.
Hi, well, Maria, thank you very much for that introduction. I'm certainly flattered. And thank you all for joining during your day. I know it's hard to get time away for things that help make us better developers, but I always believe it's something we need to do. So we're going to talk about primarily two things today. The first one is how can you filter as you type in a form in Access? And we'll walk through that and I'll show you all the code. And then once we're done with looking at that, we'll do a Q&A. And then I have a secondary topic which falls in the design time that Maria was talking about. I'm sort of proud and not so proud to say at least 3 accesses that I wrote more than 20 years ago that are still being used today. And if you would have told me that when I was building them, I would have laughed at you and not believed that that was true. But it is. And what that means is when we execute good practices, we build systems our clients really need, and then we adapt them as time goes on. And I recently am doing 2 new facelifts to 2 of the applications, simply because as screens become bigger and technology has moved forward, our little tiny screens that we needed when we were looking at 800 by 600 really don't work anymore. And in doing that, I've had to go back and look at my own code. So I'd like to talk to you about some of the mistakes I made early on and things I would do differently now, and share a little bit of that with you as well. So we're going to get started. I'm going to show you the filter as you type application. So both of these applications that I'm going to show you today, I will give to Maria, and I believe there's somewhere, Maria, that you put those that they can download them then and look at them themselves.
That is correct. On the AccessUserGroups.org, in the Lunchtime chapter subsite, there's a files download
Very good.
area, and that's where I will put both the presentation slides if you'd like to share those, and whatever else you would like to share. And just to note to the listeners, you have to register and become a Lunchtime attendee before you can get to that part of the website.
Great. So what I have here is I've downloaded a bunch of free data about stocks from the Nasdaq and a number of other places for us to have a data set which you could all look at and work with. So in order to implement the technique I'm going to show you, I want to give you this to-do form. If you're using an ACCDB backend, which means you're using an Access backend, these cannot be checked. You cannot have the SQL Server ANSI-92 syntax and have my technique work. I only learned that because in preparing this, the last few apps I had been working on had SQL Server backends. And when I brought the code over, I was baffled as to why none of it would work. And lo and behold, it meant these had to be unchecked. So beware of that when you start. So I've created a form here, which we're going to look at, and we're going to search for securities. And I have listed up here that we have 33,466 rows in this data set. And I typically provide this to my clients when I am using a data sheet, because until you actually click into the data sheet, none of that information appears here. And when they're filtering, you'd like to tell them how many rows they have gotten back as a result of the filter that's being applied. This section here is where we will actually put up what the filters are. I have clients at times and we find that they don't remember all the things they clicked on and what their filter says. And then you get a ticket that says the application is not working, my data is not showing. And then if you looked at the filter, you would say, well, that's because you filtered it out. So showing them the filter can help with that. So the first thing I want to look at is we're all aware that these data sheets provide ways for us to filter. Come on. See, I made this big mouse so you could see it, so we could filter. And what I want to do here is I only want to list the foreign exchanges for this example. So here's what happened. Now, what's interesting to me is that they used a not in. They talked about what I excluded, which is kind of interesting to me because let's say there were 700 and I only wanted one. That means there'd be 699 things listed in here. I would have rather just had what I chose. So I had the smallest list here. So I can now come up here and I'm going to type in, and then we're aware here that you have this unfilter. Sometimes clients or your users of your system will or will not be familiar with this. I'm going to say if your clients know how to use the filters from here and they're very good at that, you wouldn't need to do this. I usually need to do this because I have clients who are not as savvy and don't remember because they don't do it often enough. So here I want to try anything. I want to find anything with so as you can see, as I'm filtering, it's typing in here. Well, isn't that just fun?
Because this is a demo and the demo gods
So why did this not?
Maybe did you clear the filter?
Yeah. Well, the filter should clear itself on its own.
Okay.
Let me try this again.
Maybe exit the form and re-enter.
Yeah. Goodness gracious.
Hello, everyone. We ran into some glitches during the demo and had to re-record it. I wanted to let you know what happened. That morning, Windows updates were occurring behind the scenes and Access kept crashing because I didn't know they were running. Somehow, the filter text box on the format property got set to standard, which is a numeric format, so it was not able to accept the text I was typing in. I'm not really sure what happened, but I'm praying that it was that the Windows update crashes did it and that I didn't somehow type it in there, but you never know. And to show you how flustered I was, when you get near the end and we're talking about the navigation pane, I keep saying we should be able to have forms under here when what I really wanted to say was other categories because I was focused on why that form didn't work. But we figured it out and it's working now, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.
Hello and welcome. We're going to talk about doing screen filtering as we type. Before I begin, I wanted to point this out. On the object designers, you need to make sure that this is not checked if you're using an AccessDB as the back end. I do a lot of projects with SQL Server, and I had this on when I prepared the demo and couldn't figure out why my code didn't work when it was clearly working in the other forms. So beware, you need to make sure this is set properly. So we are re-recording this. Initially, there was an issue, and once we get through the demo, I'll show you what happened. So what I'd like to point out is I always tell my customers how many rows are being shown because you can see that nothing's listed here because we have not activated anything in the grid. The record count isn't showing up. Sometimes I like to tell them how many rows there were originally, and as we filter, this will change. I think it's important for them to know how many rows they're seeing and that there is in fact a filter on, because for a lot of clients, it's not really obvious to them to look down here. They don't think about it even though I say so. So what we have is I've given you a bunch of data that I downloaded from the Nasdaq. It's open source and free, so you can have a large number of rows to test with. There's a query here, which we don't really need to look at, and then my form. We're going to look at this as a split form, and I will also do it as a continuous form. So we have a lot of securities here, and people don't always remember exactly what the name is. And when I'm using this in an application, I have clients who do a lot of venture capital investing and angel money and things of that. Companies change their names over time. People aren't really sure exactly how it was spelled, but it had something like this. So they want to do a like filter. One of the things I want to show you first is if we were to filter here and say, I don't want any of the American exchanges, I want only the foreign exchanges, we create a filter, and we're now down to 13,501 rows. With the approach that I've taken here, we're going to see that that filter got removed, and that's intentional. You can control that. We'll talk about how that works. We can also see that I'm telling them what their filter looks like. So I'm looking for something biopharmaceuticals. So I'm now down to 60 rows based on what we have here. So rather quickly and without a lot of screen flutter, we gave them an opportunity to search with what they wanted. To me, this being able to add another wildcard in their search is very helpful. If they know how to do it, they'll use it. We can also see that the filter here can be taken on and off. In order to get this cleared, there are things we have to do because it is not controlled by the access filters. So let's look at the code itself. So what we have here is, I'm showing you a debug that I have put in the app for you to use and what it allows for, and I'll show you. And typically you might put this in a table value that you change rather than as a constant. But for me, this is debugging for the developer, and I put this here. And what it allows us to do in this form is I won't actually print anything from here unless that filter is true. So I don't have to keep commenting or uncommenting whether I'm doing the Debug.Print or not as I work. So I included that just for you to look at. Maria and I have used this technique a couple of places. I have one that I use to capture user data. Sometimes you can't debug because you don't know the order of the events or how this particular user is interacting with the screens, and you get a ticket and you're like, I can't recreate it. You can actually create a module that will write out a text file for that client, that individual, and then you can walk through it and see exactly what's being executed. So I gave that to you here to look at. So let's look at our form. So initially, when we open the form, we're setting up the data sheet. We're saying how we want it to look. I don't want the form to open with a filter left over. Sometimes if our form throws an error or something else happens, things get left in the filter and in the order by column. So I want to clear that out. If you want to keep those, I suggest if you want to keep them from within the same session, they close the form, they reopen the form. You could use temp bars. You can do other things. If you want to persist it between when they open and close a form, you'll have to look into how you'd like to do that. The event we need to look at here is the security filter change event. And I put some hyperlinks up here so that you can understand about a text box. Some people choose to do this using an unbound combo box that doesn't have any data in the combo box. I find using the combo box to be a confusing experience for my end users. When they see that combo box, they expect the drop-down to have something in it. So I prefer to use the text box so that they don't have any expectation that the control is going to do something else. Now, a lot of times we use this Application.Echo to stop the flicker on the screen. What I find is that using it, because this approach is responding quickly, it actually caused the flicker for me. But I left it here for you so that you can turn it on and off and try it for yourself. And this application will be up on the Access User Group website for you to be able to download. I also wanted to point out that the text column gives you what's displayed on the screen versus value, which gives you the underlying value. We have an unbound column, which means there is nothing in the value. We need to use the text column. And text can only be accessed if the control has focus. You can get value at any time, but you can only get the text value if the control has focus. And that's important. It's also important to know that it cannot be null, while value can be null because it is a string. So here we're checking to see if the text has something in it. We know we have focus because we're actually in the change event, so we don't need to set the focus here. Some people were asking, why do you want to turn the allow filters on or off? I'll show you that in a moment, and we'll talk about what that does for you. We simply take the text that they've typed in, and we create a string, which I'll close this now. I use the like. I create global constants for my variables, which I don't want to have to remember how many double quotes or single quotes I need to put together in order to get a single quote. And this allows me to change the wildcard if it were to be a SQL filter or something else. So our format is double quote wildcard, the text that they have entered, another wildcard, and a double quote. I then make sure that the filter is on. I set the filter. I reset the focus. I get it back to the end of where the text was. And then I fill that text box that shows them this so that they know what filter has been applied. If I come in here now and I do my filter, no, it's not. See, it doesn't like it if it doesn't have focus. So let me, fat finger typing. Now, unclicking this filter causes the filter to go away. But in order to make this go away, you have to clean it up. It won't happen because you've removed this filter, because access filtering doesn't know anything about this text box. So what we needed to do was, in the current event, set the focus to the filter and remove the text. Now, I don't really like this approach, but it's the only one I found that currently works, because the current event fires often and a lot. So you want to be as specific as you can in setting this value. So there are some other events we should talk about. So the form has an ApplyFilter event, but as of 426, no matter what you're doing, whether you're clicking that filter icon at the bottom on or off, the same apply type always occurs, which is a 1, apply the filter. Maria has reached out to the Access team. We're trying to find out if they're aware of it or what is the intended behavior so that we know what to do. I left this code in here so that you could debug and play around with it yourself and see what happens.
And Kim, let me interrupt here. So far, the Microsoft team has been unable to reproduce this issue, and it seems to work fine for them. So we are still trying to get like a repro of this for them to dig into why it's not working in this particular case. So
sure, and you can give them this app and they can see it.
Yeah, they claim it works fine, but they must be doing something different. So.
Well, I wondered, and here's another, there's a form filter event, right? A form filter event, but it only occurs when they open the filter window by choosing filter by form, advanced filter sort, or server filter by form. And I'm wondering if you have to have done this in order for this to actually activate.
Yeah, I don't know.
And change values, right?
We'll figure it out. And we can put details about what we find in the description of the video when we post it.
Sure.
So hopefully we'll get follow-up by then.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead and continue. Sorry.
No, that's quite all right. So this event doesn't help us any. We don't interact with it. We don't cause it to fire. I also have a button that will allow them to clear the filter out if they're so inclined. So let's look at this, and we're going to uncomment it so I can show you what will happen. So I have now removed the ability for the user to filter using Access's built-in filters in the data sheet or the data grid. You are going to have to think about your users and how they interact with this. If they want to be mixing this filter with other filters, you will have to have something more sophisticated to put your changes in than what I've shown you here. The reason I haven't had to do it and I don't do it is, one, if my client understood, let's go back and put it back on. Now, you have filters occurring from a number of places. It can be confusing because I'm not showing this filter being added. My belief is this: if my client is able to understand how to use this and can do contains, begins with, does not begin with, they don't need a filter like this from me. So they are aware that they don't click ICE capture if this is being clicked. They tend to do this. They don't come down here. So you sort of have two different levels of users. You may want to understand by client whether you should have those be on or off or how that works. So let's stick with this. And then when I do, it comes off because I'm replacing it with the text that I have here. So that's something that you'll need to think about and what your user's experience is going to be. But if they are good with the right click and they're already doing this, they don't need to be using your filter, is my observation. But I did want to point that out to you so that you would know to think about that. So that's what this allowing the filters to go on and off is about. It's to decide whether or not your users can then start to fill the form based on those built-in filters from Access. So let's look at this in a continuous form to see if there's a different performance impact. I didn't make it necessarily look beautiful, so the rows look like this. But it works. I did find that when I turned those repainting options on and off, I got a lot more flickering. And I think that's because this is responding very promptly to what we have here. So I want to let you know it works either way with either type of screen. Maria, is there anything you want to talk about?
The only thing that I can think of is, can you just go over kind of from the beginning why you would want to use this kind of technique, you know, the quantity of records and
Sure.
that kind of thing.
Sure.
And also maybe address, I feel like when I do forms like this, instead of starting out with my data source of 33,000 records, I actually start with a blank data source. And it's not until they put something in the find box for the first time that I then go and do the actual search. So I'm having less back and forth, particularly with a cloud-based system. So maybe talk just a little bit about those two issues.
Sure.
This example has local data, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
So where is my continuous form?
It's a form
Yep.
format or something. Yeah.
So I use this technique because I have pre-filled the data and it's local data. It's not SQL Server data, and I'm not going to be going back and forth across the network to execute a SQL query or potentially with cloud-based data. You could allow them to start with a filter, but I think it's important to tell them how many rows there were available in the whole universe, whether you applied the filter or not. And the reason for that is they may get a number that's either way too high or way too low based on what they put on, but if they have nothing to base it against, they won't recognize that there's an issue in whatever search criteria they've put in if they're not seeing what they expect to see because they didn't have enough rows to begin with, something else is off, there are other things happening. The reason I created this is there is an Access backend, and things change names, especially when you're in the investment world and you're doing venture capital funding and angel money. Companies start out with one name, then they get another name, and someone's trying to talk to you about them, and they're saying, well, it used to be Kim's Super Magnificent Access Form, and now it's just called Search as You Type. They have a number of things, and if they can see and scroll through or they know what they're looking at, that works. My client actually has more than 35,000 rows in their table. So allowing them to see the data set and then to start to filter it helps them look at it. And I haven't had a performance problem with it at this point, but there's certainly a case to be made for not getting any data across the network until you have sort of filtered it. But I'm not actually applying the filter to the query. I'm applying the filter on the form after you've gotten the data so that I get all the data once, and then as we go back and forth, and they may be looking for 20 or 30 or 40 different stocks, then they would know, right? Which without me having to start fresh because I filtered the query. So I am going to get all the data no matter what, because that's the use case here. They are looking for or entering data from the venture capital funds that they invest in, and they'll see there's 300 undistributed funds, stocks that they're potentially going to receive as part of this benefit. They may or may not know the name. They don't type it in correctly. So in this use case, giving them all the data is what works best because they're going to be looking for a lot of them to then find the stock they're looking for or the potential stock because they may not be public yet, to enter whatever the financial terms are each time it's reported to them.
Okay, I think that answered the question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, this is certainly a fascinating technique. I love the fact that you're putting in the stars for them and handling that syntax. But you are currently only using this filter on this, is it the security column?
Yes. Yes. And in my real world, I do it based on the symbol, the security column, and the market. So
Okay.
I will concatenate together multiple filters if they've entered them, all using the same technique for each one of those.
Perfect. And that gives you, I think, a more modern UI search.
Correct.
Which is essentially what this is then demonstrating.
Right. I didn't want to overcomplicate this example in order to get your feet wet to allow you to try something. There's certainly enough data here that you could work on the subtleties. I don't know if you've had this experience, Maria. I've had data sheets which have a large number of columns, and when you get to a certain point, you can't continue to use these filters anymore. You can't add anymore. There's too much. Because if we look at this, I can put the filter in here and we would see that the filter starts to get really long as a string, right? Because I, in this case, have actual values in this example. In mine, it's normalized data. I didn't put that in, again, trying to keep this as simple as possible to communicate the concept.
Yeah, so that there's a maximum on the length of the filter string is what you're saying.
I believe so. You can, if you put together a data sheet with 20 or 25 columns, which if you're, it's not impossible. You've seen them too. You have data that there's a lot you're trying to communicate in this form to them. The filtering eventually stops working effectively because I believe the filter itself is getting too long. I haven't tested to see what that exact restriction is. I'm sure there is one. I don't think it's an unlimited memo type of field.
Okay, sounds good. I also don't know what it is. I tend to not experience that with the data sets I use, but I can certainly see, especially if you've got long strings that you're filtering and you're choosing multiple values, that you could approach that limit pretty quickly. Or if you're
Right.
trying to filter so many columns. I find it difficult to keep track of more than 2 or 3 filtered columns at one time, just from a UI
Yes.
user perspective anyway. So I don't usually find that to be a limitation, but certainly if you've got long field types and you're doing that kind of work.
Right. So
Another technique.
Yeah, you can capture these and put them in this text box.
Right.
If you'd like. And then people know how many filters they have because they forget to look down here and, well, which one of these columns do I have one on? You can expand and make your font size bigger all you want, but these are still the same size. So
Right.
Here's the actual form. Oh, do I have one on this? No, I don't. If you have a lot of columns, it's difficult for them to keep track of even which columns did I put a filter on. And maybe you don't have to show the whole filter. Maybe in this list, you just want to put the column that has a filter on it so that they're aware of what they're filtering. Because I don't know about you, I always get calls that say, my data's not here. And I'm like,
Right.
well, share your screen. And I'm like, well, you have a filter on. I can see that down at the
Oh,
bottom.
right.
And, they don't realize it's filtered. It's not, to me, extremely obvious, especially from a visual perspective, that this column has now been filtered. Yes, the funnel is here, but if you look at the overall screen, it's small and it blends in.
Yep.
So
I agree.
I think that you can put those in here, and I think that's very helpful for them. And it doesn't have to be this big. You can make a smaller box here where they're just listed the columns that they have selected from below.
So anything else you would like to cover on this particular subject, or are we good, I think?
I think we're good.
All right. Thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you for having me. Access had introduced in 2007 the Navigation Pane. And I don't know about you guys, but when a new release comes out, I'm busy looking for other development tools and new ways to write my code, and paying attention to the Navigation Pane never really made my radar. So typically when we log in, we see this, right? Tables, queries, forms. Well, you can actually customize this and create your own custom groups. So if you were to right click here and you go to navigation options, what I've done here is I took 6 or 7 of the sample databases that Microsoft offers as templates, and I created a custom group, assets, customer service, and one I called DBA. So let me show you what happens. When I pick assets, I can now group everything to do with asset management for a department, for a thought process. But even more than that, I can mix together forms, code, and a table all under this group. So now I have an ability to have organized objects which are dissimilar, not the same, right? So not all forms together and then all queries together, in a way that they're functionally related. So when I went back and looked at my apps and thought about, what if I get hit by a bus? How is someone else going to work with this? How do I document my code? Well, here, everything related to the asset details and the list is all here. I don't have to be going to the table section to look at the table. I don't have to go to the macro section to see if there's a macro that's being used here. So this is a really nice way to organize all of your stuff. And what you can do is you can also put the same item into more than one of these groups. So in our traditional way of looking at access by object type, it's only listed once. You can never list it again, and you can't list it as something else. But if we were to look at assets, I could even rename this. That doesn't rename the underlying object, but it certainly renames my shortcut, because that's what these are. These are shortcuts to those objects rather than being the master list of those objects. So to me, this is a great way to organize and manage your projects. And when I was talking to Maria about using the navigation pane, one of the interesting things that she mentioned is it came on her radar because she had a client who was using it instead of having a dashboard. So it appeared in their navigation pane. And for one of my clients, their screen width is actually larger than I can make an access screen for. So I have a lot of space over here. And rather than making them go back to the dashboard all the time, I can create something in the navigation pane that would do the same things that this does for them. So I took one then and I called this the DBA. So I view myself as the DBA. Here's everything for assets, everything for calls, rather than them being listed out one at a time. Here are some queries about getting to the navigation pane. There's no real documentation about how to make these work together. I spent hours when I first came across it trying to search through Google to find sample code up on Stack Overflow or what were people doing. What I did find up there was mostly related to how can I build this at runtime so that whatever group they're in or people are in, that they build the navigation pane for them for navigation in a menu at runtime rather than at design time. But I've created my own list here and everything is together. So here's the knowledge base table and the forms. I would say that in a company, I would probably have a knowledge base for customer service, for case management, and other things. So this knowledge base would be repeated and could appear in all of those groups. The one thing I found that I didn't like, which I didn't get to go to the Denver group to comment. So in their application that Microsoft gave us the templates, they don't indicate to you that this is a query, a table, a report, a form. There's no prefixing. So stuff's getting all kind of mixed together. And if you think your end users are going to recognize what these are, you probably might want to think about naming them in some way where we prefix them with what they are, a table, a query, a form that you're going to show them that they can execute. So you can create them to manage it yourself as the DBA. You can create them by functional groups. This is everything. If I'm working with the customer service department, these are all the things I give them access to, because we typically aren't going to build a separate app for everyone and then have them all share a big database on the backside, because there's a lot of things that overlap and we don't want to have that code in multiple places, especially about the things that we do. My one complaint, besides the fact that I didn't like the way Microsoft's team built these, is that there's no ability to have a subform under here. So I couldn't create a form under here that said customer forms, customer reports, customer queries and tables, and then code modules that I might use. So they do get mixed together like this. In my own projects, it works out okay because I prefix things in a way that they appear together. All the queries appear together. All the forms appear together. Code appears at the end. So I don't have that. Maria did put a topic up for us to request that they enhance this a little bit, because there's no reason they shouldn't be able to give you subforms.
You call it subforms or subgroups?
Subfolders. Folders underneath,
okay.
Like when we think of Windows and we look in our directory here and we can click through things.
Right.
Right. We want to be able to sort of drill in. So I think of them as folders. or a grouping underneath it that's the same. And you can work on creating your own code to turn around and copy like filters. There's at least 3 or 4 of these forms in here use this filtering concept. So if I was to look at customer lists, it's not one of them. Let's do cases. So here's this form, these filters. You can save a filter. This filtering logic is all contained in here, and there's code for managing the filters and the details. I would like to include that then in the area where we're using filters on the form. So if I have to go debug it, I'm not running around looking for this form and what is it called? They've been put together. So that's my discovery about the dashboard and how I can utilize this navigation pane in order to manage myself and hopefully pass things along to another developer should I win the lottery or marry a multimillionaire and I don't work anymore. That whoever gets my code and gets to work on it will have some understanding of how things go together.
Any questions or comments on that?
Were you all aware of it, or I was just slow to get to the party?
I think it's a cool way to organize stuff if you work on one big application a lot.
Right. And I have a number of those. So for me, I thought it would help explain for other people, anyone who came in and had to pick up where I left off, how would they do it? Because people, I don't know, people can give me paper documentation when I get their projects, and I think that's really nice, and they spend a lot of time on it. But I've done this long enough that I never trust the paper that you hand me. I want to go look in the app and look at the code and understand what's really happening, not what you thought was happening when you wrote it and then it got changed and the documentation didn't get updated. So for me, I like to put things in the application that you can see and look at. So if there's any sort of code, I like to put the comments in where the code is so that as I'm working on the code and I change the code, so these are filters that got converted from the macros that they had in the app. If I had written any of this code, there'd be comments in there about when it got put in, what was I doing, why are we doing this if it's not super obvious, so that people know as they're working on it. And then you're more likely to update the comment if you're in the code and you change it. It was good. I had 2 very large projects that I'm doing that facelift on. And as part of that, I'm cleaning all of it up and organizing myself in this manner, and thought I'd share it with all of you because I'm surprised that it came out in 2007 and I have Access Bible books from 2019 and there's nothing in it about how to use this effectively and how to take advantage of it. So if there's no other questions, the last thing I wanted to share is there's a couple things. I'm not sure where I am with RubberDuck right now, but I don't think RubberDuck was my problem, but it might have been. I do not get compensated in any way for these tools. Access DevTools is from Philipp Stiefel. I hope I pronounced his last name correctly. It's got a find and replace. It's really good. If you're not familiar with vbWatchdog from Everything Access, it's the greatest error handler you can ever get, and you will never have to write error handling code unless there's something special that you want to do with a particular type of error that may be thrown. I love not having to think about that anymore, and every project has error handling in it. I have not implemented it in this application that I demonstrated, or we would have seen that. And RubberDuck is free. You should make a contribution to them if you use it. People who build things for free and share them with us, I believe we should reward them for their time and effort. And Access DevTools you pay for, and the Watchdog. There's MZ Tools if you're not familiar with it. And if you don't know about Stardock fences, I'll show you something. So if we were to look at my desktop, this is what a fence does. These are all the objects on my desktop, but I don't have to sit and look at them. I can organize them in ways, and I can do this. And now the only thing you see is the fence I told you to keep up as we were doing this demonstration. It's, I think, under $10. It might be under $5. I don't remember. I have clients who their entire desktop has stuff on it. I have no idea how they find what they're looking for. And again, it's about organizing yourself to be more productive.
So do you know whether it works on Windows 11 and 10?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
It worked.
I haven't bit the bullet yet and moved to 11, but I know a lot of people are starting to.
Yes. So my version that worked on 10 worked on 11.
Okay.
It was for $9, and they make all kinds of other tools that are relatively inexpensive that you can buy a package that contains everything, handling multiple computers from the same monitor. You can put everything in, create a tabbed interface. So everything for my presentation could have been in a tab here. I'm going to open up Excel. This isn't on my list, but I'll add it. If you spend a lot of time in Excel, I use this most there, but you can, it also goes for Word, and it's taking a while for that to load in, but once it does. So what this does is it allows you to have multiple Excel workbooks open at the same time in the same UI. So you're doing this instead of making whole versions of Excel keep popping up. This also
Is that part of Fences?
No, this is part of Office tab, which is from
okay.
Extend Office. I love it. You can have it in Word. It works in Word, PowerPoint, Excel, Access if you wanted. I tend not to use it in Access because Access has already got its own tabbed environment going on, and I find it conflicts, but it works in all the Office products. You can change how these look, and it's called Office tab from Extend Office. So some of my favorite tools, anything that helps me. I can also create Excel favorite lists. You add forms to it. So if I have 6 favorite Excel files for a particular client, I can put them in here and then see them and then just pick them right away without navigating to where they are or having to find them. So fun tools. I like tools as long as they don't cause my app to bomb.
Thank you very much for doing the presentation today. We will give you another chance here, or record it separately and post that instead of this part of the
Right.
actual demo. Although some of the debugging here I think could have been very useful. Well, and thanks everyone here for being our first Zoom meeting guinea pig.
So I create my own Debug.Print. And what that allows me to do is to decide from my constant here, if I'm working on the app and I want all this stuff to print out as I'm going along so I can see what values are. And Maria, we did something similar to this when we were working together, because we had the initial app that I had to build, our client didn't use the mouse ever. Everyone was trained to do all of their work without a mouse. It was a high volume data entry and retrieval process, so using a mouse is not productive. And sometimes you can only debug when you know exactly what path all the code took and where did it go. So this allowed us to be able to turn it on and turn it off for an individual person. And then instead of doing Debug.Print, we actually wrote it out to a text file. And then we could pick up the text file and go through it and understand how whatever was happening and why. So I usually have a couple of these, one for me for debugging, one for debugging when my client is doing something, whether or not I want to write it out to a text file or not. And then I don't have to think about it anymore. It either prints or it doesn't because I say yes or no. And I don't normally keep them as constants. They would most likely be in a table specific to your client and your individual user potentially. And you want to be able to release it and have them turn that on and off to get you back whatever it is when you're debugging what's wrong. So that's it.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us. I do not yet know what the May topic is going to be. So if anyone has any concrete suggestions or wants to offer to present, let me know. Otherwise, I will figure out something between now and then. And again, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you very much, Kim.
Thanks ever so much.